This event is supported by SAMHSA and the content is developed by the presenter. The opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the views or policies of SAMHSA, HHS, or American Indian Alaska Native PTTC. Following today's event, you will receive a follow-up email, which will include links to the presentation slides and recording, as well as information about how to request and receive CEUs. It'll also include a link to our evaluation survey, which we call GIPRA. We would really appreciate you filling out this survey. It is very important to our center to ensure that our events are beneficial to those that attend. Your participation is voluntary. It takes a few minutes to complete, and you can skip any questions that you don't want to answer. All the responses will be kept confidential and cannot be linked to you. If you have any questions about this survey, please reach out to myself or anyone on our staff. Although we are gathered virtually today, we wanted to take time to acknowledge the land and pay respect to the Indigenous nations whose homelands were forcibly taken and inhabited. Past and present, we want to honor the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. Okay, and now we'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Avis Garcia. I will let Avis introduce herself and turn the time over to her. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good morning and good afternoon for those of you in another time zone. My name is Avis Garcia. My Arapaho name is Deitas. That is a strong woman that was given to me by my grandparents. And I am from the Wind River Reservation. I am a member of the Northern Arapaho tribe. I am also part Eastern Shoshone. My father was Shoshone and my mother is Arapaho. I have been doing these presentations for a little over a year now for the Addiction Technology Transfer Center. And I have about 20 years now of professional experience in providing substance abuse treatment and mental health counseling services. And I also do a lot of consulting for people that are looking for various types of topics to be covered, ranging from domestic violence to mental health, working with youth. And I've done a lot of work with family, and I was asked to do some presentations specific to family work. This last session that I'm presenting today looks more at a Native perspective. And when I do these presentations, I always preface my work with, I'm not speaking for every tribe that exists in our country, that I speak from my experience and my knowledge, although I will emphasize some common themes that have occurred throughout a lot of my research here. So today, some of the objectives that we will look at are the mental health concerns, services effectiveness, efficacy approaches, cultural values and strengths, the navigating of two worlds, areas of need will be pointed out, look at the familial context, the therapeutic relationship, levels of acculturation will be covered, and well as some general practice guidelines at the end. And this is not to say I'm saying this is how to do it. You can do this, however it fits you, however it suits you. And as we go on, I'll share more about my experience and how I've come to do my work with families when I work with them on the Wind River Reservation, mostly where I come from. I am in transition to Crow Agency, where I will be working for their substance abuse and mental health as a clinical director there. So I'm in the process of moving. Some of the current data that's available is, according to the BIA, there are 573 federally recognized tribes in the United States. 229 are located in Alaska. And the 2010 census indicated 1.7% of the American population. It's increasing a little bit, which is a good thing. which is approximately 5.2 million, identify as Native alone or in combination with other races. I sometimes wish that would let us know how many are identify as only Native American, but what other tribes they represent, because I know several on our reservation are mixed tribes, including myself. Some of the mental health concerns that I found in the literature I researched, I take my time to do research on all of the presentations that I'm asked to do. I have attached the articles that were part of today's presentation to the slides that you guys will have access to. I tell people, take it, use it, share it with people. I'm not one of those that wants to collect on what I'm getting out there. My goal is to share and to help people. So if you can use it, please do so. Some mental health concerns are traditional mental health services are underutilized in Native populations. And I am currently participating as a mentor in a leadership program, and a couple of the mentees in the program have projects that they are working on to enhance mental health services in the areas they are working currently. And two of these people's projects are working on increasing the return rate and people just coming in for mental health services. So it's pretty much the norm, and this has been the norm for quite some time. I'll talk more about this as I proceed. Of all inpatient and outpatient, according to SAMHSA, in 2010, 0.4 to 0.6% were Native people. So of all the people receiving inpatient and outpatient services, not even 1% have utilized those. Among 3 reservations meeting criteria for substance use disorders, about 20.7% reported the use of formal treatment. So not everyone uses it. It's, I want to say there's a stigma. I think we're all aware of that, but there's a lot more. And the more I go through here, you'll get a better understanding of where I'm coming from. The services effectiveness, about the study that I'm going to cover the first half of this, and the article is attached, about they surveyed 865 Native parents and caretakers for this study. It was 71.7 reported traditional services were the most effective. And 59% reported that they talked to an elder. 49.1% said that they use tobacco offering and prayer. I personally don't use tobacco. I prefer to use sweetgrass. 39.8% work with a traditional healer, and 24.3% talk to an outside counselor off the reservation. So as you can see, the numbers go down to where very small, maybe a quarter of these people that were interviewed in this study actually utilize the services off the reservation. So it is really common to consult with a family member, such as grandparents, parents, siblings, aunties, uncles, or other extended family members in the Native community where I come from. I was raised by my grandparents, so anytime I had a problem, they either knew and asked, or they were the first place that I would go to. Counselor preparedness. There are the number one reason for underutilization of traditional counseling services is the lack of public knowledge related to Native culture, the cultural appropriateness of clinical approaches and counselor cultural competence, evidence that Native cultural competence is low, incomplete, biased, or limited, negative statistics, including high substance abuse and suicide rates, are all negative. So a lot of the information that gets presented is negatively biased. I think it just reinforces all the negative stereotypes about Native Americans. So my job has always been to flip this around and make it more positive and look at all the good things we have going on in our communities, as opposed to the social problems that challenge our people. And then there's also not having any regard for the contributing factors, such as historical and transgenerational trauma and generational poverty. Being the first licensed professional counselor on my reservation, I often attended meetings for the county that were off the reservation, and I would be shocked at some of the therapists, even with PhDs, reactions to working with Native Americans. And some of those meetings I just got up and walked out of because they did not acknowledge the historical trauma. I felt like they were really inconsiderate to our culture as a whole. So I could see why not many Native Americans would want to go to the off-reservation services. A lot of the information that is presented in the textbooks is limited and biased. The Indigenous people's cultural perspective may appear foreign to many practicing counselors, particularly because of the vast array of differences in culture and values found across tribal affiliation, nations, or geographical locations. And this is by Dr. Terrell Portman. She was actually my mentor as I was a participant in the Minority Fellowship Program by the National Board of Certified Counselors, which also provided me a nice fellowship to help me financially in pursuing my doctorate. And they continue to do so. So if anybody's looking for scholarships or fellowships for further education, let me know and I'll gladly pass that information on to you. Counselors are not immune from limited or biased understanding of Native life. Successful counseling for Natives is predicated upon counselors' understanding of Native culture and experiences of societal oppression, use of clinical strategies grounded in Native worldviews. Counselor training. It is imperative to examine counselor training related to Native populations. There is an experiential course dedicated to Indigenous healing practices, but I don't have the information on that. I will be researching that, but as I continue, I'll get into some of my work and how I use that. In one of the studies, it showed that 132 professional counselors with the American Counseling Association indicated that the number of completed courses related to multicultural training was 1.37. And in my training, we had one class, and it's usually like one chapter, and it's very vague. And of course, it points out all of the negative issues as opposed to positive things. Primary multicultural training from one diversity course in the entire program is pretty much the norm. I don't know of any that actually spend more time focusing on work with Native populations. Few scholars have described specific educational strategies for expanding Native American cultural competence in counseling programs. The efficacy of approaches, I would suggest that perspectives be elicited from the members of the Native community. So whichever community you are in, it is good to get that information from them. I have met a lot of different Native tribes throughout my lifetime, and I'm always looking at similarities and differences that we might have. And, I ask them a lot of questions as they do me as well, because I often work with other Natives, not just my own tribe. Cultivate educational strategies for cultural competence of trainees and practitioners. One specific aspect yet to be addressed is the textbook content. Like I said, one chapter, very brief, very vague, most likely written by somebody who is not Native. And now that more of us are entering the counseling profession, I am hoping to see more research. As I did the research for this presentation, I want to tell you, I found maybe a handful of articles that date back to 2004. So counseling work and working with families in particular, we need more research there. The general multicultural textbook, one chapter dedicated to Native culture, specific characteristics and considerations, elements of Native history, cultural values, social issues, risk factors, challenges, and clinical guidelines, and implications for counseling Natives. I could teach an entire class on this topic. So this is just a brief snapshot of it. So you're getting, a lot of good work that I've done. I frown on the one chapter, even in my children's textbooks from school on history. There might be a chapter, and of course I always have to point out everything that I find wrong with it so that they understand. And I really think Native history should be the first thing taught in our schools, not American history. Okay, some Native perspectives, many identified by tribe, clan, and heritage. Influence of parents and family exposing them to Native practices. I was raised by my grandparents, and my grandparents often told me that we're teaching you this, but your mom should be doing this, but we're doing it. So I've been doing my best to teach my children what I was taught. We also have an influence of artistic and practical skills and influencing school and career decisions. So a lot of what we do is influenced by our family. I have nieces and nephews, and so I like to be supportive of them of whatever's going on in their life. We also have survival skills in the wilderness. It's a lot of how we were raised, and I think it is something that just comes natural to us. We also have the artistic expression. My grandmother sewed. She made star quilts. She made my dance outfits. She made me shawls. She made me dresses and taught me about beading. So a lot of this, as parents, grandparents, aunties, being able to share and pass this on is really important to our families. Some of our cultural values and strengths, just the fact that we still have our culture, we're still here, and we've learned to adapt. I really feel that this incident that's gone on recently with the Black Lives Matter has made Native American people even more invisible. And so I really feel that we need to stand up for ourselves as a group and speak up and be like, hey, we face a lot of those same issues on a day-to-day basis. So we need to look at the perceived strength of our Native culture. Again, we're still here. Look at the sacred, our beliefs and practices, including our ceremonies, our dances, our prayers, healing practices, the sweat lodge, afterlife, and sacred objects. A way of life is not compartmentalized. Our Native life it's just the way we live our life. We never think of it's a separate little thing. And we also have supportive relationships of one big family. And it is very important to preserve your native language. Being raised by my grandparents, they spoke the Arapaho language a lot, but I now feel bad because the Arapaho language, the Northern Arapaho language where I come from, our language is considered endangered. So right now we are at a critical period of doing everything we can to save it. And I was so glad that when my oldest daughter went to the university where I graduated from, she took every semester of Arapaho and she can introduce her. She knows more than I do. And so I'm really glad that the University of Wyoming has been really strong in keeping the Arapaho language being taught. I sat in some of those classes and saw white students in there. And I was really impressed with how involved and interested they were in learning language. And we have also survived colonization and genocide. This navigating two worlds came up in a meeting that I had the other day with an agency that is seeking some training from our program. And I have looked at this a lot myself. And this is when we're talking about being defined by our native culture, where we come from, and being defined by the majority Eurocentric culture, so the non-native world. And living off the reservation, like I have, requires the ability to be able to balance the two of them, but not losing who you are. It is challenging, and we have to take responsibility for maintaining tradition and the marginalization of acculturation. So we don't want to, I don't know. For myself personally, I consider myself to be bicultural in that I can do both really well. I can live here and live there, but it's come from years of my living close to the reservation, but working for non-native people. And so it is a challenge to balance life in both worlds. I've often referred to it, if you haven't heard me on here say, the real world is what I consider to be off the reservation. And my other world is when I go home to the reservation. We live in two worlds. We live in a Western white man world, and then we go back to the Native Indian world. Our struggle is that you have to know both. You can't just live in one because you need the other. You've got your high definition TV, cable, cell phones, Wi-Fi, and then you go back home where you have your language, your praying, and your ceremonies. Oppression. Any form of current or historical discrimination or injustice experienced by natives. There has been significant historical injustice and trauma in almost every tribe that exists in this country. Being from the Arapaho tribe, we have, I am a descendant from the Sand Creek Massacre, and that was in 1876 in December, when the US government was actually sent to wipe out the Northern Arapaho people after they kicked us out of Denver, Colorado. So we often refer when we're in Denver that this is our homelands, and we all acknowledge it, and we all feel that presence when we're there. So every year, if it hadn't been for this pandemic, we always have the Denver March Powwow where we go back and we celebrate. We're still here. This was our land to begin with. And then there's also the widespread ignorance about Native culture among non-natives and pervasive stereotypes that all natives are the same when we're not. And I think the worst part for me, and I don't mean to get political here, is Donald Trump, when he very first started addressing Native issues, which he did a very horrible job of doing, was he sort of saw natives as that romanticized version of we're still living in teepees and wearing our feathers and our beads. And I was like, man, this guy is so ignorant. And the more widespread ignorance, and these are a lot of my pet peeves that just gets under my skin sometimes. There is a book called Everything You've Always Wanted to Know About Natives. It's a small book. I can't remember who the author is. Really good book if you're doing any presentations to people to educate them about Native culture. One, we're not all in poverty, are struggling with alcoholism and drugs, which is a common stereotype. Not true. I know several natives that are being truly traditional is to not use any substances. So I always like to emphasize that my grandmother never touched alcohol or drugs or anything of that nature. And so I give her credit for what I have accomplished in my life. And as far as being in poverty, I grew up in poverty. I didn't know what was poverty. I had a very happy childhood. And, we lived off the land and we helped each other. And I feel like that's what we need to continue to do. We are not frozen in time or icons of the past. We're still here. A lot of people don't know that there's even any more Native Americans. Many of us are earning advanced degrees and running businesses. Native people have been hurt by trauma. Some of our areas of need are hardships and challenges that we face, substance misuse. There's limited employment opportunities, limited access to resources, and mental health concerns are there. Substance use is often a means of coping. If you've had trauma and you haven't dealt with it, you're going to try to numb yourself thinking that it's going to go away, and it doesn't. And then there are also limited job opportunities. So we need to look at that. Also, geographic isolation of the reservations can also be challenging. I know people whose reservations are 90 to 100 miles from a major town. Looking at advocacy and collaboration, we don't want non-natives to work independently to advocate for us. We would like to work together with those people. We would prefer to collaborate. We do want to advocate for ourselves by educating non-natives about Native culture. And we would like to influence policy and serve as role models for the next generation. Some current treatment perspectives: belief that counseling is largely ineffective. There is notable stigma and shame with help seeking for mental health or substance use. Just the word freaks natives out about going to counseling. Services provided by members of one's community can lead to the perceived threat of information not being kept confidential and not wanting to disclose anything to tribal staff that work there. So there tends to be the huge trust issue that we have to be mindful of when we're helping our own tribal members. This also consists of the participants' descriptions of current treatment options, available services, and perceptions of seeking treatment. And a lot of our services are typically provided by Indian Health Services. And I know a lot of the Indian Health Services counselors are not even Native. So I often am curious of how things are working at home. Some preferred methods of care: feeling that the community could offer role models for those who have overcome addiction or psychological distress, educating one another, and caring for those currently struggling with mental health concerns, preferably by another Native person, someone who is educated about the community as far as culture and how the people are. One example that I have is a Native student. If you have a Native student at a university and they're really not wanting to go to counseling, and I actually did my own study in my dissertation of men that got their degrees from the University of Wyoming, and not one single one of these men that were successful in earning their degrees ever went to a counselor. They did find somebody to talk to, but they didn't ever seek counseling services. So it's good to connect them with other Native students and have contact with family members throughout their schooling. I've also found that the Latino population is often the next best option. I know before I got into the profession, I was often told that they were bringing somebody who was a counselor from New Mexico who was Latina, and that she worked really well with the kids. And so it's being able to be comfortable with that. So it's not to say that non-natives can't do the work, but those who are willing to dedicate their life to helping the people, I have seen be the most effective. And there is one therapist back home who's retired, who everybody knows him by his name. And it takes people like that who really care about the people and dedicate their lives to helping. Some accurate information, informed and invested educators, dispel myths and accurate presenting of natives as members of modern society. We are a part of this world today. We're not Hollywood Indians, we're real people and we matter. Knowledgeable about Native history without romanticizing the past events, such as colonization, and also being aware of current events such as the Dakota Access Pipeline and other issues relevant to modern Natives today. Native community diversity. We don't all do the same thing. We don't speak the same language. Our dances, our songs, our food, all things are different between the different tribes. I'm two tribes, so I'm often looking at what the differences are between the Shoshones and the Arapahos. It's important to be well informed. For those that are not Native or of that tribe in particular, you would like it would be good to seek out those immersion experiences so that you can spend time with those people. And being immersed in it, you can actually get an experience that you can't read about anywhere. Some barriers to higher education is financial. Costs prevent many from attending college or completing college. It's expensive and you have to work really hard. I tell everyone that asks me for advice that it's a huge sacrifice, and be prepared to rely on your skills that you grew up on. I had aunties who would save commodities for me, and I picked them up and I gladly used them because I had children when I was going to school. There's also the difficulty of maintaining paid employment and going to college at the same time. And this is a reality for a lot of Native students. So those of you that have children or family in school, do what you can to help them. It goes a long ways. The familial context, 2/3 of American Indians live outside tribal areas. I go back and forth. I was actually thinking of going home soon to take work there, and my friends are like, you only stay here for a while and then you take off again. 50% who seek counseling services will not use tribal resources. So a lot of the families will go someplace else if they can, or if they even do. Again, there's over 574 federally recognized tribes. We have 200 different languages. We're not the same. There are different factors that we have among all the various tribes, includes affiliation, geographic location, the level of acculturation, and socioeconomic status. A lot of the training programs for counselors are ill-equipped, and I don't know how many of you watching today are actually licensed professional counselors, but I encounter a lot of people often on and off the reservation that aren't licensed professional counselors. They might be peer specialists, they might be the case manager, they might even be the lady who answers the phone at the front desk. And they will often come to me and be like, oh my God, I'm not a counselor. I have this situation. And I'm like, wait. Especially on the reservation, I tell them, you don't have to have a degree to help someone. My grandparents helped me the most in my life, and they have a 6th and an 8th grade education, but they were probably the best help I ever had. So I like to say that we can help. And so I tell those peer specialists on the reservation that they're trusting you. So if you want me to kind of walk you through this, or consult you through this, you can always talk to me. So we are in need of specially trained counselors who have a broad understanding of cultural and social phenomena that you can't find in books, and usually beyond the scope of most training programs. Because of their lack of training, many counselors are not able to work effectively with the clients, which is why they tend to not go back or use it at all. Natives tend to underutilize services. We have a higher dropout rate than other ethnic minorities, which is why I prefer the brief solution focused approach. They might be there a few times and very few continue long-term. They're less likely to respond to treatment than other groups. Natives realize that services being offered really don't meet their needs. A lot of the literature I reviewed, again, I'm including the articles that I used for this presentation for you to use and read. They prefer a counselor of similar cultural background, especially when it comes to personal concerns. Other research is inconsistent with this finding. So there's some that says you don't really have to be Native or to help people. But there is a preference for a therapist who is culturally sensitive and more culturally similar. They prefer a therapist with a general awareness of the Indian-white relations, specific tribal knowledge, and an understanding of how our families operate. Cultural empathy. Non-Native counselors need to be reminded of the significance of family, community, traditional healing methods, history, relocation, oppression, and empowerment. Understanding of family is a key component. Better understanding of the role of family, kinship, and relationship patterns. And my work with families on the reservation began when I was working with the juvenile delinquency program, and we had a lot of youth that had to come be a part of our program because they were somewhat court ordered. And we combined the sweat lodge with that. We combined the native healer with that. We incorporated talking circles with that. And a lot of these kids were just dropped off, where we really focused on bringing the family in. And so there were some whose parents really wanted to make a difference and really wanted to help their child. And the sweat lodge was a great thing because it brought everyone together. And I think a lot of people, just aren't taught. So if they're willing to learn, I feel it's our job in the community to connect them with those resources. The bicultural family system, several studies show these families have the lowest susceptibility to substance abuse and other mental health issues. So the more you're able to balance both cultures, the better chance you'll have to not rely on substances for coping, and mental health issues are minimal, are managed, are addressed. We can't ignore the rich heritage of tradition. We should blend the strengths of both. And being a Native person myself, when I go home, I use everything that's there because I know what's helped me. I've been through a lot of traumatic issues, incidents in my life that I've shared in some of my presentations here. That's what brings me to this work. I want to share with people my experience in hopes that it will inspire them to maybe want to go help other people as well. So I helped myself through ceremonies. Our sweat lodge is something that I continue to do. The Native American Church and our Sundance, we're one of the few tribes who still has a lot of their ceremonies in place. And we get a lot of people that come from other tribes to see what we do once a year. We also have our traditional behavioral attributes. We take responsibility, we have respect, we're accepting of people regardless of who they are, and inclusion are often, these words are empty words in modern society, but if we can blend these with the work that we do, it will be beneficial to all that we serve. The levels of acculturation, one of the most important aspects of identity begins with the transmission of cultural knowledge through the family system and the larger tribal social network. This is tied directly to sense of self, often a direct result of the family's identification. Understanding the level can be valuable, and it is a snapshot into the worldview also of family functioning. Race is a social construct, not a naturally occurring categorical system. It is more valuable to consider the cultural ethnic identity over the racial one. It is important to understand the distinction between the two. About 60% of American Indians and Alaska Natives are of mixed ethnic backgrounds as a result of intermarriage and other interracial relationships, and also life experiences and life choices. We also have the ReTraditionalization. There should be a conceptualized, this should be conceptualized as a bi-directional continuum, which allows counselors to understand the different levels of acculturation in different dimensions of one's individual personality. So I do a lot of substance abuse evaluations, and when I do them on the reservation, the system that we have also has a cultural component that I'm always asked to make sure that I do. It's called the Addiction Severity Index, and it has several questions that asks them about their food, their beliefs, do they participate in ceremonies, do they do any arts and crafts, do they want to learn? So I've attached something here, but I always look at that to see, because sometimes this is what's missing in their life, and this is what we need to bring into their life to help them heal themselves. So there is no right level of acculturation. Levels should not be viewed as ascending or descending stepwise models, and that it's not just, our acculturation is outside of a linear format. And we are more relating to circles. And so we have the 4 areas of human personality identified, such as the cognitive, the behavioral, the spiritual, and the social or environmental. Understanding the levels of acculturation, it's important to determine the level in order to provide the most effective treatment. More acculturated clients will be more receptive to the systemic approach. Individuals who are more motivated through interconnection with one another. Being bicultural provides greater range of modes of our social behavior and cultural communication appropriate for a variety of cultural contexts. I have a cousin who has never left the reservation, and we talk about her sometimes, and we'll talk about her with her sometimes. And I've even offered to pick her up and bring her, but she acts like she gets scared. She's pretty close to her family. Traditional culture orientation. I hope I'm not losing anyone here. To make a long story short, our traditional way of life is critical to our success. A thorough understanding of the client's cultural orientation may prove to be critical in the counseling process. It is losing our culture that is hurting our people, and it's up to the parents and elders to teach the next generation. Herman Stahl, Spencer, and Duncan in 2003 indicated that American Indian individuals with the lowest orientation to traditional culture are 4.4 times more likely to be heavy drinkers than the traditional counterparts. So those who are more traditional don't use substances, or if they do, very little and not too often. There is a post-colonial detachment from traditional tribal culture and a loss of our positive coping strategies that were associated with our previous traditions, our values, and rituals that have led to the predominance of mental health and substance abuse problems. Looking at the levels of acculturation, I'll do these briefly. The traditional people live solely a traditional lifestyle, steeped in customs, belief systems, and tribal values. Preferred language is that of their people. I really admire some of my Dene friends who know their language fluently and can teach in their language. Then there's the transitional marginal, which is, these are people who may be confused or I think sometimes lost, and we need to help them find where they are most comfortable. This is marked by ambivalence. They may or may not speak both languages, often express they don't fully identify or fit in with a tribal group or dominant culture. Jones offered a case study that should be classified in this area about how thoughts and feelings about living in two worlds can affect mental health. It can be stressful. That was some of the education research that I read about a lot of Native students like myself, because most universities are Western oriented and they weren't made for us. So we have to make ourselves fit in there. Being bicultural, these are people who are fully immersed and accepted by both their native and dominant culture, feel comfortable with practices associated with each. Bicultural individuals have not felt they have to give up values of one community to embrace another and feel accepted by both groups. I've attached an article in the resources to this presentation by Garrett, and it is called Red as an Apple. It emphasizes these cultural levels that I'm sharing with you right now. Then we have the assimilated. These who are people are assimilated into the dominant culture and give up their native ways. My grandmother had a sister who married non-native, and she didn't want anything to do with anything that was native. And my grandma would say, she doesn't want to be Indian, but when we're getting money, she said, she's the first one in line. So I used to laugh at my grandma, but she spoke the truth. They embrace only customs, beliefs, and values of the dominant culture, much as traditional individuals embrace only their customs, beliefs, and values of their indigenous ancestors. They often only feel accepted by the dominant culture. And I have a friend who is an attorney who comes from one of the Southwest tribes who honestly feels that this is how all natives should be living their life. And I'm like, I disagree with that. Everybody has their right to their own opinion. Then we have the pan-traditional. These are people who have grown up in a more assimilated family system or chosen an assimilated path. So they may have grown up off the reservation and just live a whole different lifestyle. And these are the people that you'll encounter that want to know. I have a friend whose father was Apache, and she wanted to know about Native. And I'm like, you can't go by what I say. You need to make a connection with the people from that area. So these people will make a conscious effort and return to practices of their tribe. Some counseling approaches. I'm watching the clock, so I'm sorry if I tend to go a little fast. I prefer a more non-directive or a flexible approach. Natives do not like directive approaches. And I've actually done a lot of counseling off the reservation, and I've seen that go very badly. There is not one approach. There is research to support a wide range of theoretical orientations. Cognitive, person-centered therapy is probably one of the best. I feel it fits with our culture quite well. Social learning, behavioral therapy, and family therapy. And, you know, when I work with families, sometimes it's the family that brings me the identified patient. They will say, you know, maybe their adolescent is having some suicidal behaviors, and the family comes because they really want to help. So I always find a way to get the family involved, especially when they come as a unit. The network approach is a technique of a clan or a group of family, relatives, and friends is organized and mobilized to form a social force or network to combat depersonalizing aspects of contemporary life patterns. And an example that I have is when my son was in college and his friend was in college with him, my son and their family member got into some situations, and my son's friend came from a large family. And so I let them know, you guys have your whole family to come together to help him. And they realized, yeah, we do. I said, yeah, and they continue to do a great job in supporting their own family. And then we have the rule of opposites. It's a paradigm that facilitates the process of examining and understanding our behavior and intentions, emphasizing the central role choice of Native American way of life, and includes the 7 postulates or life lessons. There is a lack of consensus in American Indian culture how problems are formed and solved, and the differences may or may not fit principles of Western psychotherapy. We weren't made for what these people made up to help people. They weren't made to fit us either. So we need to find our own way in helping our people, which is why I emphasize we use whatever traditional methods you have, and whatever tribe you come from, whatever you practice, whatever you believe, those are your healing methods right there. As I continue my work and study the newest and latest theories, most are made by, like I just said, by natives for natives. So I don't think they're not made for natives. So I feel our native people, Eduardo Duran isn't specifically native, but he is Mexican culture. He has some books out there, and they're kind of over your head, but if you take the time to really read them, he's got a lot of experience that I find to be very effective. European values, they totally contradict the way we believe. European is more about independence and success, where as Native people, we want to work together, and we're more relational in how we do our work. We must understand the limitations of the Western approaches. Like I said, I like the work of Eduardo Duran. We have to return to our traditional ways of healing. And this is what I rely on. I know a lot of how my people live their life and how they think. So I reference it so that they can understand it. There should be a focus on healing. Western theories and techniques have focused on outcome therapy based on their standards, not ours. These outcome-based models that focus on success and achievement according to European standards have little use for us. So it's not, I don't think it's very critical that you say you're a cognitive behavioral therapist or you're DBT therapist or whatever. Always look what you have at home. That's what we need. Healing as an art, modern psychotherapy as used in tribes must be seen as an art not a technique. If one utilizes theory and techniques contained therein, one is acting as a technician, not an artist. The focus must be on the healing process as it manifests itself with the particular individual as part of the tribal culture. Healing wears the costume of culture, and as clinicians, we must learn to recognize its culturally congruent form. Some general guidelines as we approach the end of this presentation is there's an enormous amount of diversity within our tribal communities. There's not a one-size-fits-all model of appropriate rapport building behaviors and relationship techniques. Certain guidelines have appeared throughout the literature enough times to merit attention, and these are a good starting point. Make an effort to learn more about the individual particular culture and experience. This cannot be overstated. A more directive approach doesn't mean give directions, more of a relationship giving and advice giving as a secondary preference. And this comes from a study with the Lumbee College students. Introduce the family into the counseling relationship when appropriate, either on formal or informal basis. Like I said, I've worked with a lot of youth on my reservation, and I might be at a gathering and the kids will come up and be like, come meet my mom and come meet my family. And if I were off the reservation, I have to draw those lines of those professional boundaries. But, you know, since they're so happy to go introduce me to their family, I go and gladly introduce myself. We must always consider our traditional our healing methods, ceremonies, and rituals that are meaningful to our people. Storytelling is a powerful tool. In European culture, this is narrative therapy. We are all storytellers. This is who I am, and this is how I teach. I tell stories all the time, even as simple as self-disclosure. You know, I tell them that I can relate to their situation, and not exactly, but I can understand. It must be clearly understood, acknowledged, and accepted that many healing ceremonies are not cures, but part of the healing process provided through the entire community. Mirror verbal and nonverbal cues, including less eye contact, and be comfortable with extended periods of silence. I have had some youth who very low self-esteem who might keep their head down the whole time or stare out the window the whole time. But I know from personal experience, if I'm not looking at you, that doesn't mean that I'm not listening to you. It is important to be hospitable in the services. So if you can get something to drink or a small snack, when I worked with kids, I used to stock up at the store and get stuff that I know the kids would like, because they would really open up after I got them something to eat and something to drink. Our professional vocabulary can detract from the relationship, so it's important to always be mindful of that and be willing to explain maybe what words you are using. So I always tell them, sometimes I forget, so remind me. I'll gladly teach you some new words. Awareness of prevalent issues. There is an increased risk of substance abuse, depression, and suicide compared to the general population. A risk of co-occurring disorders in our Native American population. The specific issues that may be present in therapy may require further research on part of the counselor. So depending on what that person presents you with, you might not be able to address it specifically with cultural methods. So sometimes it takes a little bit of research. I like to recommend those Wiley treatment planners. Those come up with some really good things. We also have physical and psychological distress. Understand the interconnectedness and be prepared that physical complaints can arise during the counseling process. Most people are more willing to tell you they're having headaches, their back hurts, they're just not feeling right, than they are to tell you I'm depressed, I'm anxious, or I have all these other problems. And then one thing that I didn't attach is the medicine wheel. I use that as I use it for the relapse prevention plan, but I call it their wellness plan, because I feel like some of the words we use in counseling has negative connotations. So most people are open to the medicine wheel. I didn't attach it, but I'll send it here shortly when this is done. It's just a circle of the medicine wheel that people can fill in. And the case formalization. In the DSM-4, there is a cultural case formalization in it that is very helpful. Those of you that use it, it is the outdated, it's not the DSM-5, it's a DSM-4. So if you can find one, you can find it in that book. Some future considerations. I got just a few more minutes here. Research indicates that many counselors are not prepared to counsel their Native clients. Addressing cultural competence with more in-depth training programs, I feel, is needed. Despite the current body of literature, many counseling professionals feel their questions aren't addressed. We still need a lot more people to enter the field and to do some studying. Not only studying by European methods, but using our indigenous research methods. I was the first person at the University of Wyoming to do indigenous research, and I basically had to teach myself and the people that I was presenting to what that involves. Basically, that's research by natives, for the benefit of your own people. So if you want any more information on that, at the end of, here's a couple of videos, really good on YouTube, very good examples of what I'm talking about today. So if you have time, check those out. They're really good. Here's my contact information. I want to say haho. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule today to join us. And I really appreciate you being here. And I know that it means a lot to you to help your people, and that's why you chose to be here today.
Thank you so much, Avis. We really appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us today. Before we close, we had one question from Troy in the chat box. He asked, what's the name of the book that was mentioned earlier? Something about everything you wanted to know about Native Americans?
I think that is the title of the book. Hold on. It's in Amazon, and I believe that is the title. Hold on, let me. I think the other books I referenced are Eduardo Duran's. He's got some really good books.
Troy actually might have found it. Does this sound familiar? Everything you wanted to know about Indians but were afraid to ask.
Yes, and if you look on YouTube, that same person actually has a presentation that is very well done on YouTube, that author.
Perfect. Thank you, Troy. Expert Googling there.
Cool.
All right. Well, we have one more minute. Any other thoughts or questions that anyone has today for Dr. Garcia?
I attached a lot of really good reference material, and I'm really notorious for getting some information out there. One of them is the tip from SAMHSA. It's called Behavioral Health Services for American Indians and Alaskan Natives, based on extensive research. Very good. I attached The Red as an Apple by Garrett that discusses those cultural levels. And I attached another article on the cultural assessment tool. And so there's some good stuff there. And I'll get that medicine wheel out here, and I'll send that to them so they can add that to all of those handouts.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We had one more question from Gilbert. How do we get involved in mentoring?
How do we get involved in mentoring? What do you do, Gilbert? I can't see the chat box on my screen here. Let me see if I can stop that.
I'm a therapist in private practice.
Okay. The professional mentoring that I am doing, I actually applied to the Native Leadership Program that the ATTC does. However, on my own, I have taken people under my wing, and they've like openly accepted me mentoring them. I just have a young lady on the reservation who just received her professional licensing in Wyoming, and she often reached out to me. She would have situations that she just wanted to consult with me on. And just reaching out to anyone that you know might benefit from some of your support, that you want to help, that's mentoring. You don't have to belong to any professional organization. That is just something that, you know, comes from here. You want to help and you want to support. So I know some people that are in their doc program right now, and I always let them know I'm here because we don't fit in, we don't know what it's about. So those that have been there can help those that are coming. You know, they need that support. For me, it was a very out of place experience. So I wouldn't have made it where I am without people that supported me. So I in turn give that back by doing the same.
Sounds great. I know I'll reach out to the state licensing board here. I know there's a different licensure path for our Native tribes and tribal members, and I think there's probably a need there for some supervision. So I'll definitely reach out to them.
Yes, that would be great. They really benefit from our experience of those who've been in the field for a while. And so, you know, I tell them, don't be afraid to ask me anything. And they've been really good about contacting me on their own. Good question.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you so much. Thank you for your questions. And thank you again, Dr. Garcia, for your wonderful presentation. Keep an eye on your inboxes, everyone, for our follow-up email with the resources that Avis referenced today. And have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you so much.